I'm Bree Stock. I'm a Master of Wine based in the Pacific Northwest and on Oregon's West Coast. And I'm excited to be here with Sonoma Wines today to talk about sustainability with Kim from Dry Creek, who is really here to talk about a lot of the history of her family's vineyard, which was one of the first in the region, post-Prohibition, one of the first wineries, and really redeveloping a lot of the old vines in that beautiful region.
Thank you. Welcome. We're just delighted to get started. And I will be talking a little bit about my family's wines and specifically the wine that I chose for you today. I want to hand it over to Bree because I know you have some background in Sonoma County, which is most important that we leave that with you. The importance and the beauty and the really the special place that Sonoma County is within the California world of wine.
So welcome to Sonoma County, very important region where the first vineyards were really settled in the region by Russian fur trappers in the 1800s and planting a lot of Spanish and mission grape varieties in the area. And really Buena Vista was the first winery that was founded in the area and has still some of the oldest vines still in production in the US currently, primarily focusing on what was planted back then, which was a lot of what we refer to as mixed black vineyards, of Italian varieties, lots of Spanish native varieties, and really what people traveled over with and planted in their home soil. Buena Vista was the first commercial premium winery, but we did also then happen to have Prohibition. Vineyards still existed throughout that time. Even though Prohibition happened, there was still a lot of sacramental wine made and wine for home drinking as well. Judgment of Paris and the vineyards that returned and wineries that returned in the 1970s and 60s really cemented Sonoma back onto the main stage of the global forefront of the wine industry. Judgment of Paris is actually coming up to 50 years next year, and it's amazing to me that the wineries that stood out in the Judgment of Paris are still as relevant today as they have ever been, and the old vines that everyone has been continuing to care for and tend to throughout the last 50 years have really cemented Sonoma and California at large as being one of the preeminent fine wine regions in the world. You saw a little about the climate and the geography and how that really impacted the formation of California and the land that we have to work with in California, and that is really what forms the incredibly diverse regions of Sonoma. And you can see here there are 19 AVAs within the Sonoma County AVA, beginning in the south and San Pablo Bay area where the coolest vineyards really begin, and traveling north between the Coast Range. We really do get into the northern, dry, warmest regions as you travel north and as the valley becomes more and more condensed. So moving from broader plains, benchlands that are able to be planted on the alluvial soils up into the benches and then the hillside vineyards where some of our oldest vines and most fine wines and structured wines are being grown. What we have in front of us today is a selection of all of these. It's a really great snapshot of Sonoma and really from a sustainability perspective. So Sonoma was one of the regions a decade ago, well, the only region a decade ago, that committed itself to being 100% sustainable in its vineyards. It is the only region that has really come close to attaining that, with more than 99% of its growers being certified sustainable by California Sustainable Wine Growing Standards. It is just an extension of the people and the land. This is a mostly region that is really farmed by families, and a lot of families who still live on the land and tend the vines themselves. So this is a very natural and organic movement, and Kim's husband Don actually started really the formation and structure of the sustainability template for the region and for California wines nearly 20, 30 years ago.
About 35 years ago.
Can you give us just a little snapshot into how that came about? And I mean, 30 years ago, 35 years ago, that's quite
a long time
progressive.
Ago. And at the time, he was actually on the board of directors for the California Wine Institute, and helped write the code of ethics and the model, if you will, which so it's considered a triple E equation, and I think there's a slide somewhere. But if you think about a stool with 3 legs, right? There's 3 E's. One of the E's is environmentally conscious farming. So those are the practices that would be obvious to you. Minimizing pesticide use, planting cover crops in the vineyards, installing bat houses and raptor perches to attract birds of prey for property, and insectary gardens to attract beneficial insects, those sorts of practices. The second leg of the stool is your social equitability, and that is a measurement of how you show up in the community, how you treat your employees, what you give back to the community. So, for example, at my family winery, for about 30 years, I've put on or hosted a cleanup Dry Creek Valley trash day, where all of the neighbors come and we pick up trash. That's just a simple example. You know, we contribute lots of wine and money to local charitable causes, so that's part of your social equitability. And then the third leg of the stool is actually a measurement of economic viability, because the point of being sustainable is to have a wine growing business that sustains the generation. So I'm 2nd generation, my son just joined our business, he's 3rd generation. We've been in business for 53 consecutive years, same family, 100% family owned, no corporate ownership. But if our practices are so egregiously expensive, or we can't, continue to farm because we can't afford it, we would not be a sustainable business. So there is that economic sort of component. And to be certified 100% sustainable in the state of California, it's a certification that we reapply for every single year. And for example, at Dry Creek Vineyard, all of our estate vineyards and the business separately have to go through the certification process. And every year you have to prove that you're improving. And so you're never done. You're always looking to do more and to do better. And
yeah, that's a really important to note, is that everyone is continuing to improve. And so while sustainable is one of the largest coveralls for all of the different certifications that we have throughout the state, and the different farming practices, whether they be organic, biodynamic, or regenerative organic, which is the newest, I think everyone ultimately is aiming for sustainable at a minimum and growing from there. And that's where you're seeing bringing in the biodiversity, bringing in more of the social equity as well. And it's really important for vineyards to continue to be biodiverse and increase that the soil health and the health of their outside, the surrounding region, as well for wildlife habitat and biodiversity.
Really, the whole point of it is to leave the land in better condition than the way we found it. And that's, I think, every single family in the county is committed to that in one way or another.
And that is also where sustainability is headed in Sonoma as well, is into the winery next. So while vineyards are nearly 100% sustainable, the next step is into the winery and everything that goes on in the cellar and then takes out into the groundwater and into the holding ponds and from there. So continually trying to improve and continually trying to do better. Going to jump into the wines very quickly, and also so that Kim gets to tell us about her family's wine just a little bit more deeply as well. As you can see, what's on the table in front of you is just a snapshot of the more than 80 different grape varieties that are grown in Sonoma County. However, the major grape varieties that really have the most success because of the proximity to the cold San Pablo Bay and the cool Pacific Ocean are some of the cooler Burgundian, Alsatian varieties, particularly in the south, until you move into the eastern side of the valley, where you're getting into a more moderated climate and an ability to really ripen thick-skinned, structured grapevines. So the Gloria Ferrer is Spanish producer who came over in the 80s and began planting in carneros. What I love about this producer is that when they arrived, there were only a handful of Pinot Noir and Chardonnay clones available to them to plant their vineyard, which from the outset was going to be designated as a sparkling facility, a sparkling wine vineyard. They're one of the largest landholders in Carneros. Their vineyards are certified organic and in many places biodynamic practices in place. And what the family did, Gloria and her father introduced more than 17 different Pinot Noir clones, working with UC Davis to import those clones from Spain, France, and beyond, so that they could have a massal selection and also have that biodiversity of clones. In the glass in front of you is their classical composition of their cuvee, their brut style of sparkling. All of their sparkling wines are Pinot Noir dominant or Blanc de Noir dominant. Please go ahead and taste as well. I don't want to hold anyone up. You don't need my permission to taste. Please reach out. So 88% Pinot Noir and the remainder being Chardonnay. Gentle pressing. In the cellar, they are very minimal on any additions. It's organic fruit, and then the wine spends a year and a half on tirage before dosage. Dosage of 12.4 grams per liter. That's quite high for a New World sparkling. But that gives you an understanding of just how cool the climate is here with the San Pablo Bay fog coming in and resting over the vineyard for a really extended period of time. It allows the vines the grapes during the growing season to get an extended ripeness and get full phenolic and flavor development, and being harvested at the end of the season still at very low sugar levels. So you can really taste the Pinot Noir influence and red fruited profile in these wines, which is what I really love about the wines. And they have so much delicacy, but also structure, and just iconic for the region. Their practices, again, net zero by 2050 is an important commitment that they have made. It again comes back to more hands-off in the cellar and more responsibility to sustainability in the cellar. Carbon-free electricity in the vineyards. They're also using tractors that are low impact and electric operated. And then climate-smart farming practices. This means introducing animals into the vineyard as well. Extensive cover crop planting to build the soil and help to retain all of the soil moisture. And then 100% recycled water and green waste. And as you all know, that is one of the largest expenditures and wastes that come out of the cellar every single year. I really love this wine just for how much creaminess it has on its palate, and also that bright red fruit profile in there. Very, very typical of Carneros. The next wine in your glass is the Benzinger. Benzinger is one of the largest biodynamic producers in California, in the whole of the US, and a very early commitment to biodynamics and biodynamic certification. The Pueblo Vineyard is one of the family's oldest vineyards. They've been farming it for 20 years, organic and then biodynamic immediately as soon as they were able to get that certification. This vineyard is on the Sonoma Coast appellation. It's high above in the mountains, so it does sit above a lot of that fog and captures a lot of the natural sunshine and ripeness that comes from the sunshine hitting those western hillsides as well. It is fermented in 70% neutral French oak. There is a portion of stainless, and then 20% of, there's 25% new French oak on this wine as well. But you can see that the intensity and structure of the fruit on the palate really shows the the cool climate influence, but that extended ripening season that they get from being very high elevation here, but above the fog line as well. Wind is also an important element in this vineyard, and they talk about how the wind thickens the skins of the fruit and helps to bring high acidity and retain natural high acidity into the grapes. They gently press and then ferment it into barrel. So as I mentioned, all 4 vineyards are biodynamic certified. They have a lot of animals in their vineyard, and really important is the biodiversity of those natural prey relationships in the vineyard. In regions where we have dry farming and natural habitat, we have in drought years, we're seeing a lot more vole and underground impacts happening on the vines. And so these natural predator-prey relationships are increasingly important as our climate continues to change, as is the cover crops and everything else that people are doing to continue that biodynamic and sustainable certification to offset the impacts of climate change that are happening as we see every year in the vineyards. Now, Kim, you're up.
Great. So the wine that we have for you is our 2022 Old Vine Zinfandel. And you may or may not know, but Dry Creek Valley is considered really, I think, one of the world's premier Zinfandel regions. When my father started Dry Creek Vineyard in 1972, he was the first winemaker there after Prohibition, as Bree said. And one of the things that attracted him to the region is that there was a wine growing region or industry prior to Prohibition, in fact, from the late 1800s, and there were still a few remaining existing producing old vine Zinfandel vineyards. And so we've actually made Zinfandel for over 50 years. At Dry Creek Vineyard, the definition for old vine means it has to be at least 50 years of age. The average age of these vines is 95 years of age, and the oldest vineyard that goes into this blend was planted in 1896. And just think of that. It survived, World War I, World War II, all of those sorts of things. I mean, they're really remarkable vines, and they're only about 2 feet tall. They're completely hollow in the inside. And I remember when my husband came to work for my father, he was our ranch manager, and he went out into the oldest Zinfandel vineyard in the valley, and he couldn't figure out why the farm workers, they were doing some leafing, and before they would pull the leaves, they'd walk up to the vine and they would kick it, and then they'd stand there and look at it, and then they'd start removing leaves. Well, after watching this for a little bit, he realized what was happening was the rattlesnakes that are in the hills in the summertime, it's warm, they crawl up inside the vine, which is completely hollow. The mice do that, and then the rattlesnakes go next. So the farm workers were kicking the vines to make sure there were no rattlesnakes there. But anyway, it was in his work as our ranch manager on this particular vineyard that he started, and this is over 30 years ago, he started to really develop this notion of sustainability, because it was very curious to him, how did these vineyards survive over 100 years? Why are they still producing? Well, it's because of very minimal intervention, right? Very friendly farming practices. They're all dry farmed vineyards, and so that's where he began to learn and develop kind of the concept of sustainability that we really work with today. The other thing that's interesting about this wine is, you may not know this, but old vine, there's no real legal definition, sadly. We were the first winery to coin the term back in 1987. I had just come back to work for the winery. I was too ignorant to know you should trademark things, so I didn't trademark it. So old vine is used by many vineyards. Some of the vines are old, some of them are not old. So you really have to do your homework. But in our case, this is almost an average age of 95 years old. I want to also speak about the Dry Creek Valley, which is one of the 19 appellations that Bree mentioned. What's very unique about this region is that it's tiny. It's about 25 kilometers long and by maybe 2.5 kilometers wide. And it's a warm region, but because we're very close to the Pacific Ocean, only 20 miles or so, we are very much impacted by the fog. So it's a warm region that gets that fog factor. We have a 30-degree drop in temperature pretty much every day. And that's one of the reasons why Zinfandel is so beautifully structured in Dry Creek Valley. So often Zinfandel is planted in regions that are very warm and too hot, and sometimes those wines can get a little bit high in alcohol. At my winery, first of all, I don't like high alcohol wines, so we don't produce them, but I think a lot of that has to do with the climate here in Dry Creek Valley. So the daytimes in the summer are quite warm, but the evenings are chilly, and you really do need a jacket or a sweater. I'll just point out that these vineyards this is not 100% Zinfandel. There's actually 20% Petit Syrah, so we always add a little bit of Petit Syrah for structure and color. There's actually 1% Alicante Bouschet and 1% Old Vine Carignan. And my winemaker Tim sourced a vineyard a couple years ago that was a Carignan vineyard, very hard to find, from, I don't know, the 1940s, I think. And in a way, so it mimics what we call field blends, because most of these old Zinfandel vineyards that were planted by the Italians in the late 1800s, they were not, 100% Zinfandel. They were field blends, and we've done studies throughout the vineyards, and there are other, unusual varieties, things like Trousseau Gris and, I don't know, all kinds of things. So who knows? But anyway, this is, I think, a great example of how Zinfandel should taste and smell. You get that beautiful boysenberry fruit, a little bit of cardamom spice, maybe some, pepper, maybe it's a little bit white pepper or black pepper. But you have, and then I think, it's definitely a bold wine, but there's a lot of acidity and liveliness on the palate, so it's not as that overripe style that sometimes people produce. And
that's what I was just going to mention, was that this is so quintessential of this region, which has that beautiful freshness to it, and especially old vines, they're not overproducing, they're very much in balance.
Very low yields. We get maybe a half a ton or maybe 1 ton per acre. I don't know how to convert that, but that's very low yielding. I mean, it's really pretty extraordinary that these vineyards continue to produce fruit year after year.
But the freshness on the palate and that sort of al dente profile to the fruit is really the impact of that massive diurnal temperature shift that happens in the region and keeps those nights super cold and bringing that freshness and keeping the acidity in the fruit. That means that you can have a very long hang time, and you don't need to hang out underripe fruit flavors in this region. What you're doing is really picking at the ultimate balance of physiological ripeness, flavor development, and acidity, and having no need to adjust in the cellar. And you see that texture on the palate as well. It's a firm tannin profile, but it's still a digested tannin almost on your palate, that perfectly ripe, velvety tannin profile, and not over oaked, which is really something that I love to see, because it just shows the quality of the fruit. And I think that that's what we're really, more and more often looking for, is that transparency and the authenticity in the glass coming through. And that's what I think Dry Creek Valley has always done for me, for your wines. But with this old vine vineyard as well, it's such a treat to taste it. So thank you, Kim. That insight is just fabulous to have.
I'm trying to do that.
I just wanted to repeat the question so that everyone can hear the question. Sarah just asked about, is there a conscious effort to be starting to communicate this new style, which is really the old style of Zin, to the major markets and to major export markets? And so, Kim?
Well, I think yes, but I also think that one of the problems is there are Zinfandels in the other style that are made in very large quantities, mostly by very large companies, and oftentimes those are the ones that get exported. And so smaller family-owned producers like me and many others in my region have a harder time kind of communicating, and tasting is believing. I mean, you should come and taste. I have another Zinfandel that you will love too, but you have to taste. And I think it's just one person at a time, and educating people like yourselves that Zinfandel can be made in a beautiful, elegant style that pairs beautifully with food. It doesn't have to be and shouldn't be, 15% alcohol or higher, and sort of taste like port. If I want port, I'm going to drink port, right?
And so I think the answer to your question, Sarah, is a lot of this is also we're relying on wine communicators to have these conversations, and also for people to invest in small family-owned businesses who are making these styles of wines as well. And we unfortunately are out of time, so I just wanted to make sure that we taste the Cabernet, which is beautiful old vine Cabernet from Silver Oak. So this is 95% Cabernet Sauvignon from the next valley over, so moving a little more inland to the east and a little hotter and warmer. And these are benchland and hillside vineyards of Cabernet Merlot, Cabernet Franc, and the traditional Bordeaux varieties that have been planted there for the past 100 years. Alexander Valley is one of the warmest, but these hillside vineyards are able to capture the majority of the sun from the western setting sun that really brings beautiful ripeness to this fruit, which is still in a rather moderate climate for this variety. So in this wine, what I like again is that you have that quintessential Sonoma freshness on the nose and palate of fruit. There's sweetness of fruit. You know that you're in in California, you're getting a lot of sunshine, and there's beautiful sweetness of fruit, but there's also vibrancy and a hint of al dente-ness to the tannin profile as well that makes it really lovely and fresh on the palate.
Quick little factoid about Silver Oak is they were founded in 1972 as well. And they were one of the original, there are eight or nine wineries that were founded in 1972. They call us the class of 72. And I believe they're still family owned as well.
They are still family owned, expanding into other regions, but really leading by example in terms of the amount of commitment that they're putting into both their vineyards and their cellar in terms of sustainable practices. You can see that freshness in the wine. There's beautiful, balanced oak on there as well. Really, this is, I think, in 4 glasses, a really great representation of what Sonoma is. It's family-owned vineyards, it's commitment to sustainability and beyond, and it is freshness in the glass. Ripe fruit, fresh fruit, old vines, and historical families who are committed to maintaining and making the land better than they found it. Thank you, everyone, and hopefully we'll see you again later.
Thank you. Enjoy your day.